What's up guys, today we're going to be doing I-95, so let's get started. Before we start this I-95 journey, I just want to remind you that you have 2 free requests per video, so I recommend you use them. I-95 runs along the whole East Coast, from Florida to Maine, and it is about 1,905 miles long. We split off of US 1 here in Miami, and we get no control city, which is an alright choice. Here we meet US 41 as Southwest 8th Street. Here in downtown, we meet US 1 as Biscayne Boulevard. Then we meet I-95, which goes to Port Miami and Miami Beach. Then we meet I-195 and Florida 112. I-195 goes to Miami Beach and 112 goes to Miami International Airport. Next we meet US 441 with no control cities. Next we meet I-595 in Fort Lauderdale, and it goes to I-75 in the Turnpike, and it also goes to Fort Everglades, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood International Airport. From I-595 we get signed for West Palm Beach. In West Palm Beach we meet US 98 and Florida 80 as Southern Boulevard. At a random interchange we get signed for Daytona Beach. Don't know if you can see beyond those trees, but we are very parallel with Florida's Turnpike for a little bit. We meet US 192, which goes to the Melbournes. Next we meet Florida 528, which is my southernmost point of I-95. Then we meet Florida 50, which goes to Titusville and Orlando. Now as we reach Daytona Beach, we meet I-4 and Florida 400 and US 92. They're all signed for Orlando and Daytona Beach, and now we are signed for Jacksonville, and this is my personal picture at the interchange. Then we meet US 1, which is signed for Ormond Beach and Bunnell. And then we meet Florida 100, which goes to Bunnell and Flagler Beach. Then we meet US 1 again, but this time it's signed for St. Augustine. Here is the International Golf Parkway. I stopped here to go to Buc-ee's and check that out, and that was a cool experience. And here's my personal picture, the entrance to the World Golf Village. Here we meet Florida 9B, which is supposed to be future I-795, and 9B is supposed to be numbered after our assigned state route, Florida 9, and it goes to the Jacksonville beaches. Next we meet I-295, which is signed for Orange Park and Jacksonville beaches, and we get a new line for Savannah since we're entering Jacksonville. We meet US 1 again as Phillips Highway. Here we meet Florida 202 as Butler Boulevard, and it's signed for Jacksonville beaches. Here we meet US 90, US 1 again, and Florida 13 is Atlantic Boulevard, Main Street, and Acosta. And we have a yellow sign for downtown for some reason, which is weird. And now after that exit, we get a good view of the Jacksonville skyline. As we meet I-10, we see that it is signed for the trash control city of Lake City, which should be Tallahassee. Here we meet US 23 as Kings Road, and it goes to Edward Waters University. We also pass by US 17 and US 90, but they don't get acknowledged here for some reason. We meet US 1 again. Here we meet I-295 again, and the West Beltway has nothing signed, but we have a new line for the International Airport of Jacksonville. Here we meet Florida 200 and A1A, which are signed for Fernandina Beach and Callahan. Here we meet US 17 and get whatever this is. And here's where we leave Florida. I have personal pictures of the signs here. I thought the hurry back sign was pretty funny. Now we enter Georgia and first meet St. Mary's Road, which has this cool little section for the Georgia Welcome Center, and a nice little Sunset Street view from St. Mary's Road of the I-95 southbound shield. We meet Georgia 40, which is signed for Kingsland and St. Mary's. At a random interchange, we get signed for Brunswick. That should be Savannah, dude. Why is Brunswick here? This is more of a secondary city, if anything. And now I have a personal picture of the US 17A2 and Georgia 520 interchange here. They're signed for Brunswick, Waycross, and Jekyll Island. And this is a very nice view we have here with the sun and all. Next we meet US 25 and 341, which are signed for Brunswick and Jesup. And this is also a personal picture. Here we meet Georgia 99, which goes to the Buc-ee's of Brunswick, and has a giant sign with just nothing on it, so what's the point of this sign? And I have a lot more to say here. First off, I have a personal pic on the top left, the Georgia 99 sign. It's a little blurry, sorry about that. That's why the Google Maps image is on the top right there. And we also have a personal picture from the Derphog of these terrible control cities for I-95. Brunswick, of course, we've already discussed that. And Darien. Darien's just pointless. This is like signing Benson on I-95, which we'll get to later. And also, this is being signed right before the actual Darien exit, which I think is just insane and just really stupid by GDOT. So, yeah, please just change that to Savannah. I beg you. And once again to the Derpod, thank you for the picture because I could not find this on Street View anywhere, so this really helps. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. And next I have a picture of I-95 Business and Georgia 251, which are signed for Darien. And then we meet US 17 Georgia 25, which is signed for Riceboro and South Newport. Now we meet I-16 as we enter the Savannah area, and it is signed for Macon and Savannah. Honestly, Savannah could be replaced with Charleston since we're already in the area, and Charleston's really good since US 17 goes there, and that's where I-16 goes to. And we are signed for the airport in Florence. And I'm going to say this as well, Columbia would be a better choice than Florence because of I-20. Next we meet US 80, which is signed for Pooler and Garden City. Next we meet Georgia 17 as Jimmy to Loach Parkway, and this route's basically to US 74 to your Georgia or US 58 of your Georgia. Next we meet Georgia 21, which goes to Fort Wentworth. Now we cross the Savannah River and enter Jasper County, South Carolina. Here we first meet US 17 and it will take you to Hardyville, Estill, and US 321, the two text things missing. Next we meet US 278, which goes to Beaufort and Hilton Head Island. Here we meet Beast Creek Road, and it is connected to US 17, US 278. Let's check it out. As we go down this exit, this road shouldn't even be named to be honest, but we come to this. So for one thing, US 278 isn't acknowledged until you get to the stop sign, and why is there a right arrow if there's already like a yield ramp to turn right on there? And Switzerland. Dude, Switzerland's one of the worst control cities on US 17, if not the worst, because it's not even, for one thing, it's not even incorporated, and the population is super low, and it's not even an actual town really. It's kind of like, if you've seen my shorts review episode of South Carolina 10, it's basically like Verdery, and dude, it's just terrible. I'm sorry. And Richland is alright, I guess. It's kind of mid though. And yeah, let's just move on. Next, US 17 joins us here. As US 17 leaves us, it gets the great control cities of Charleston and Beaufort, and we still have Florence. Here we meet US 21, which is just signed for Orangeburg. Here we meet US 78, which is signed for St. George and Branchville. Here we meet US 178, which is signed for Harleyville and Bowman. It would have been cool to see Orangeburg on here, to be honest. Here we meet I-26, which is signed for Columbia and Charleston. Here we meet US 176, which has the very mid-control cities of Holly Hill and Cameron. Here we meet US 15, which is signed for Santee and Ellery. They're kind of favoring South Carolina 267 for Ellery here, which is a little odd. Here we meet US 301 and an invisible South Carolina 6 connector, and US 301 will be joining us. Here we meet US 15 South Carolina 6, which was signed for Utahville and Santee. US 15 is joining us here, but they don't say anything about that or acknowledge it at all here at the sign, so that's stupid. Here we cross Lake Marion with a beautiful view. And then here we get the I-126 treatment at the sign for US 15 and 301 as they split from us. And they're signed for North Santee, which is a terrible control city. It honestly should be Sumter and Manning. No other choices here. Maybe Summerton, but really just Manning and Sumter. And then we meet US 31 on its own again, and it is signed for Manning, which is the right choice. Then we meet US 521, which is signed for Alcaloo and Sumter. Here we meet US 378, which is signed for Tuberville and Sumter, which works. Finally, we enter Florence and meet US 76, and it goes to Timmonsville. Next, we meet I-20 and I-20 Business. I-20 itself is signed for Columbia, and I-20 Business Spur is signed for Florence. Next, we meet US 52, which goes to Darlington, and we have a sign for Fayetteville now, which is the right choice. Here we meet South Carolina 38, aka future I-73, and it is signed for Bennettsville and Marion. We meet South Carolina 34, which is signed for Dillon and the Dillon County Courthouse. Here we meet South Carolina 9 and 57, and they're signed for Dillon and Little Rock. Didn't know Arkansas pulled up. Here we meet US 301 and 501, and they're signed for Roland and Laurinburg. And I like to call this the double state exit because for one thing, this exits in both Carolinas, has 2 control cities and 2 US routes. And here we also have access to south of the border, so that's cool. Now we enter Robeson County, North Carolina, and on the exit ramp for 301 and 501, we get south of the border for a control city, which is interesting and whatever, I guess. And we also get a North Carolina state line sign on the left beside the stop sign on the exit ramp, so that's cool. First, we meet US 301 again and join with it, and we will keep heading north. We meet the rule breaker routes I-74 and US 74. They're signed for Laurinburg, Rockingham, Whiteville, and Wilmington. Here we meet North Carolina 72 and 711, and they're signed for Lumberton and Pembroke. Here is where US 301 leaves us in Lumberton. Here we meet I-295, which goes to Fort Bragg and Pope AAF. Here we meet I-95 Business as we enter Fayetteville, and oh no, it's that time. Benson's here. Benson should not be here. It's so simple to fix this. Just sign Raleigh or Richmond. Please, just sign one of those, or maybe even Rocky Mount, but just change it from Benson, please. As we meet I-295 again, we meet US 13, and it is signed for Newton Grove. Next we meet US 421, North Carolina 55, and they enter Dunn. We meet North Carolina 50 and 242 in Benson, and they're signed for Newton Grove. And we get this monstrosity, Dunn and Smithfield. This is like the Darien and Brunswick thing all over again. Dunn shouldn't be there, Fayetteville should be there. Freaking Smithfield shouldn't be there, Rocky Mount or Richmond should be there. Please, just fix this monstrosity. We meet I-40, which is signed for Raleigh and Wilmington, and from it we get Rocky Mount and Smithfield. Thank goodness Rocky Mount's there. Just remove Smithfield, please. Thank you kindly. And also they're in the wrong order. Here we meet US 301 and 701, and then North Carolina 96, and they're signed for Newton Grove and Civil War battleground site, so that's cool. Here we meet US 70 as we pass under I-42, and it is signed for Selma, Pine Level, and Goldsboro. Here we meet North Carolina 42, which is signed for Wilson and Clayton. Here we meet I-587, I-795, and US 264, and they're signed for Goldsboro, Raleigh, and Wilson. As we enter Rocky Mount, we meet US 64, which is signed for Nashville, Raleigh, Rocky Mount, and Tarboro. Here we meet US 158, which is signed for Roanoke Rapids and Weldon. And you can see a little I-85 detour sign in the background, so that's cool. And we are signed for Emporia and Richmond now. Here we enter the great state of Virginia. Here we meet US 58, which is signed for South Hill, Emporia, and Norfolk. At a random interchange, we see Emporia and Petersburg. Emporia should not be there alone. It should be Emporia and Rocky Mount or Fayetteville or Raleigh instead of that. And for Petersburg, I can see why they signed that, but Richmond should be there. Here we meet US 301 for like the 10,000th time, and it is signed for Petersburg. Here we meet I-295, which is signed for Washington, and that's a really good choice. And I wouldn't mind if 95 was signed as Petersburg and Richmond, both of them, honestly. If it was like that other interchange, I would let it slide. Here this interchange is Widener Road, aka US 460. It does not get acknowledged at all, but it joins us. Here we meet I-85, and US 460 will be leaving us to join it, and it is signed for South Hill, which I don't really agree with. At the same time though, it's okay because you're kind of backtracking down the Durham and Raleigh, so yeah. Here's where we meet Virginia 288. Here we meet the exits for Richmond International Airport and US 33 and US 250. And also, right after we meet those, we join I-64 westbound, and it is signed for Charlottesville. Next we meet US 1 and 301 as Chamberlain Avenue. I-64 will leave us here as we meet I-195. As we meet I-295 again, we get signed for Washington. Here we meet US 1 and US 17, and they're signed for Spotsylvania and Fredericksburg. US 17 will be joining us for a little bit. And now as we meet US 17 Business, US 17 northbound leaves us. We meet US 1, which is signed for Fort Belvoir and Mount Vernon, and we are now signed for Baltimore and New York City, which is alright. And then I-395 is going to be 8 miles away, and it's going to be signed for Washington, and we'll begin to it shortly. Here we meet I-395 and 495. Northbound 495 is signed for Tyson's Corner, and 395 is signed for Washington. And when we join eastbound 495, which is pretty unique for a beltway, we are signed for Baltimore. Don't know what happened in New York here. As we cross the Potomac River and enter the great state of Maryland, we meet I-295, the fourth one we've had so far, and it is signed for Washington and the National Harbor. Or actually, excuse me, Washington National Harbor. That line was a little bit confusing. Here we meet US 50 and Maryland 450. US 50 is signed for Washington and Annapolis, and Maryland 450 is signed for Landon and Bladensburg. Once again, we meet US 1. Here we split from I-495 and we still just have Baltimore. Sign New York City, and also for I-495, you don't need to put a line for Beltway. And for the secondary line here, we have Silver Spring for it, which is fine, I guess. Here we meet I-195 and 895. 195 is signed for BWI, and 895 is signed for Baltimore Harbor and the Tunnel Thruway. And also I should mention Maryland 166, and it's signed for Cabin'sville. Here we meet I-695, yet another child, and it is signed for Towson and Glen Burnie, and we are now signed for New York, which is good, finally. And now we go under the Fort Henry Tunnel, which goes under the sea. Here we meet US 40 is the Pulaski Highway. Here we meet Maryland 24 and a road that takes it to its potential child route, Maryland 294. Maryland 24 is signed for Bel Air and Edgewood. As we pass over the Susquehanna River, we can get a good view of the river along with the US 40 bridge way in the distance. And now we enter the first state of the Union, Delaware. Right after we pass by Delaware 141, we meet I-295 and 495. 495 goes to the border of Wilmington and Philadelphia, and 295 goes to the Delaware Memorial Bridge and the New Jersey Turnpike and New York. And we have a new line for Wilmington. In Wilmington, US 202 splits from us. I didn't mention that last slide, sorry about that. As we meet Delaware 92 and pass under I-495, we get Chester and Philadelphia. I don't really think Chester's needed here. And here we enter the state of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring. Now US 322 merges into us, just to leave us shortly afterwards to go to Pennsylvania 291 and go to New Jersey. Next we meet the longest 3-digit interstate, I-476, and it is signed for Plymouth, while we are still signed for Philadelphia. Here we meet I-76, which is signed as Walt Whitman Bridge and Packer Avenue. Why? This should be control cities, and I-95 has nothing. I don't really care about that though, because it's just one of the square signs that indicate it. Here we meet I-676 and US 30, and they are signed for Central Philadelphia. As we meet I-295, which is signed for Trenton, we make a right turn and get signed for New York, and we're heading to the New Jersey Turnpike. Here we meet US 13 again after a long time apart, and it is signed for Levittown and Bristol. And now we cross the Delaware River into New Jersey. We meet US 130, which is signed for Florence and Burlington. Here we turn into the New Jersey Turnpike. Next up we have US 206, which is signed for Bordentown and Trenton. So we would meet I-195, but I don't see a shield or anything, it just says exit 7A, so do I take its word for it? I don't know. We meet I-287 and New Jersey 440, which are signed Metuchen and Perth Amboy. Here we meet US 9, aka the Garden State Parkway, and it's signed for Woodbridge. Here we pass over this weird little spot where you can make a turnaround here, so interesting. Next we meet I-278, which is signed for Elizabeth, Staten Island. Here we meet I-78 in US 1 and US 9. They're signed for Newark Airport and Holland Tunnel. And we are signed for the George Washington Bridge. No. Just no. That should be New York City, not George Washington Bridge. I know it's a popular spot, but give it its own little section. We pass over this bridge here, and oh my goodness, we get this beautiful view of the New York skyline and this road right here, which is known as the Newark Jersey City Turnpike, and it just looks like something straight out of GTA 6, I'm gonna be honest with you. Here we meet I-280, which is signed for Newark and Kearney, and once again, got another beautiful view of the skyline. We meet US 46, and we got some state-of-the-art signs here apparently. Looks like LED signs in the bottom that can be changed, and also we are still signed for the George Washington Bridge, and US 46 is signed for the Ridgefields and Palisades Park. And now we meet I-80, which is signed for Patterson and Hackensack. As we meet US 9W, which is signed for Palisades Parkway and Fort Lee, we become concurrent with US 1 and US 9, and we're still getting signed for that bridge, unfortunately. And now we go onto the George Washington Bridge and enter New York. Somewhere here, US 1-9 leaves us. Here we meet I-87, which is signed for Albany and Queens, and we are now signed for New Haven, Connecticut, which is a decent choice. Let's go on to I-87 for a second, shall we? Here we have a picture from PorterFan 900 of I-87 southbound, and you can see that we're still concurrent with US 1. I don't know why I said we split from it earlier. It was a little confusing down the urban area, so don't judge me there. And you can see that we're signed as the Crossroads Expressway, and we are signed for New Haven, Connecticut still from there. And the other direction is signed for Trenton, New Jersey, but we'll talk about that next time most likely. Here's where US 1 actually splits from us as Webster Avenue. Here we meet I-678, which is signed for Whitestone Bridge. Here we got another picture from PorterFan from I-95, and it shows I-95's two signs for New Haven, Connecticut, and the exit for Country Club Road and Pelham Bay Park. Here we meet US 1 again, and it's signed for New Rochelle and the Pelhams. PorterFan has another picture for us here, and this time we are signed for the Connecticut Turnpike and New Haven. Southbound sign for New York, and US 1 here, which is the exit for us from I-95, is signed for Port Chester and Rye. And now we enter the state of Connecticut, the pizza capital. We meet US 1, which is signed for Darien, and it's not giving me good flashbacks, honestly. Okay, anyways. Then we have this sign for Connecticut 136, and it's signed for Rowayton. Here we meet US 7, which is signed for Norwalk and Danbury. Skipping to New Haven, we meet I-91, which is signed for Hartford. And now we are signed for New London. No, this should be Boston. Connecticut's just being very provincial here, and I don't like it at all. It's not being North Carolina, Connecticut. Do better. We meet I-395, which is signed for Norwich and Plainfield. At one of the several US 1 conjunctions in this state, we get signed for Providence. And Providence is the right choice. And now we enter the state of Rhode Island. Here we meet at 295, and it is signed for Woonsocket, and then we meet Rhode Island 113, which goes to Rhode Island 5, and it's signed for Warwick. Oh my gosh, I can't talk today, I swear. Here we meet I-195 and US 6. They're signed for East Providence and Cape Cod. Westbound US 6 will be joining us. As US 6 splits from us, we also get this terrible gantry design. One's right in front of another, so that just messes up with the visibility of the signs here. But anyways, we meet Rhode Island 10 as it splits from us, and then also Rhode Island 146, which goes to the state offices. And now we are signed for Boston, Massachusetts. Here we pass under US 44. And now we enter Massachusetts in Bristol County. We can see an exit in the background for Massachusetts 1A, which goes to US 1 and is signed for Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and South Attleboro. Here we meet I-495, which is signed for Marlborough and Cape Cod. Here we meet I-93, which is signed for Boston. It takes our Boston sign away, and now we are signed for Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And also, US 1 will be concurrent with us in their own way concurrency, but there's no shield mentioned. US 1 southbound leads us to go to Norwood. Here we meet I-90, which is signed for Boston, Albany, New York. And also we meet Massachusetts 30, which is signed for Newton, Weston. Here we meet the longest US route, US 20. It is signed for Waltham and Weston. Here we become concurrent with US 3 and have no control city for some reason. US 3 splits from us to go to Winchester. We meet I-93, which is en route to Concord. We meet US 1, which is signed for Topsfield. And now we have a short time in New Hampshire. Here we meet US 1 Bypass, which is signed for Portsmouth Circle. And we also meet US 4 and New Hampshire 16, and they're signed for Newington and Dover. And now we cross the bridge into Maine. Like I said, New Hampshire was short. As we meet US 1 in Maine 236, which are signed for Kittery and South Berwick, we are signed for Portland and Augusta, which is really good, and we're also the Maine Turnpike. Here we meet Maine 9 and 109, and they're signed for Wells and Sanford. We meet I-195, which is signed for Saco and Old Orchard Beach. As we enter Portland, we meet I-295, which is signed for Downtown, and we have a new line for Lewiston. Here we pass over US 302. Here we meet the Falmouth Spur, and it goes to Falmouth, Freeport, 295, and US 1. And we also meet Maine 26 and Maine 100. They're signed for Falmouth and Cumberland. Here at the set, so we have a lot happening. So we meet US 202, Maine 4, Maine 26, and Maine 115. And they are all signed for Gray and Wyndham. Here we meet US 202 and Maine 4 again, and they brought along Maine 100. for the ride, and they're signed for Auburn and Lewiston. We meet US 202 again, along with Main 11, 17, and 100, and they're signed for Augusta and Winthrop. Also, we are signed for Waterville and Bangor. Here we meet Main 3, which is signed for Augusta and Belfast. Here we meet US 201, which is signed for Fairfield and Skowhegan. Here we meet I-95 and Main 15, which will go to US 1A and Main 9, and they're signed for Bangor and Brewer. And then up ahead is US 2 and Main 100, and they're signed for Herman, and we are signed for Orano and Holton, and we're concurrent with Main 15. Here's where Main 15 was split from us. Here we meet Main 43, and it is signed for Old Town and Hudson. Here we meet Main 16, and it is signed for Alton, LaGrange, and Milo. Here we meet Main 157, and it is signed for Medway and Millinocket. Here we meet US 2, which is signed for Smyrna. Here we meet US 1, which is signed for Holton and Presque Isle. Then we meet US 2 for the final time. It is signed for Holton International Airport and the Industrial Park. And we get this end sign at the Canadian border. And you really think we're going to end there? No, we're not. Let's keep going. Since we're in Canada now, we're now New Brunswick 95. And we will be meeting New Brunswick 540 first, and it's signed for Richmond Corner and Belleville. And we are signed for Woodstock. Then we meet New Brunswick 555, and it is signed as Rue Holton Street. And then we end the Trans-Canada Highway 2, which will take you to New Brunswick 550, Woodstock apparently, although we're really in it, Edmundston, and Fredericton. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this long route. This is officially the longest video in the channel so far. And yeah, I thought this is cool because of the Canada continuation, and honestly, overall this is a great journey. So I hope y'all enjoyed once again, and I'll see you next time.